Join me as I dive into the minds of reluctant readers to discover what really makes them want to pick up a book. So we're facing a reading crisis. And according to the latest national research from 2024, most students don't read on grade level. That's really not new. For a long time, the majority of the students in the United States not read on grade level. What's new and what's very alarming to me is that now about a third of students don't even read on a basic level. So what that means is about a third of students in the United States are functionally illiterate. And that is the lowest that it's ever been since we had test data in the 1970s. That is a very, very striking statistic. And what we're also finding is that there are becoming bigger and bigger gaps between the highest and lowest level students. These gaps were narrowed a little bit in the 1990s, and now they're just becoming bigger, where we have students who can't read at all, we have students who can read really well, and there's not much in between. So this is a very big crisis, and it's really at epidemic levels. It's bigger than it's ever been. Very alarming for me. So in the face of these challenges, what can one do to make it better? Well, one key to help struggling readers individually is not to have scripted curriculum or phonics programs or therapies, which are all popular solutions right now to reading difficulties. Sometimes they can help depending on your student, but there's one thing that just about anybody can do, and it can help almost any struggling reader, and that is to encourage that student to read. It sounds so simple. It sounds like something that's just too simple to really help and too basic. But the research shows that reading large amounts of text at the student's level for fun, not textbooks, not scientific books, not anything like that, but reading things that the student wants to read for fun. Lots of reading really helps reading growth. And if you think about it, when a runner just learns strategies and maybe learn breath techniques to help you to run, or would the runner get out there and run? Of course the runner's going to get out there and run, and it's the same with reading. And this is something that's largely been overlooked with these new approaches to reading. And it's my opinion this is one of the reasons why we have so many problems in reading today. It's because students are not reading in the digital age. So, how can you get students to read? Unfortunately, a lot of struggling readers are really reluctant to read. They refuse to read. They think they just hate reading. They've had very negative experiences with reading in school. And that's understandable. If you have had negative experiences with something, you don't want to do it. But that stands in the way of them learning and growing as readers. So here are some ways to engage the most reluctant readers. First, meet your student at their level. Now, every student has a reading level, and it's best practice to have the student read within a range around that reading level. So for example, if the reading level is 2.5, you might want to pick books or help the student pick books that are probably a 2.0 to a 3.0, because the reading level is not perfect. It's never perfect. Any kind of test that's given, it is not going to give a perfect result. And this is because if students read books that are too hard or too easy, they won't grow. Students see something kind of in the middle that's not too hard and not too easy for good growth. Now, if you don't know where to find your child's reading level, if your child attends a public school in the United States, they probably have taken what's called a universal screener, which is a diagnostic test. Almost every school in the United States has some sort of universal screening test now. Probably take it in fall and probably winter and spring. It's usually done 3 times at least. Sometimes it's only done twice, fall and spring. Some of the more common ones are MAP. That's probably the most common one. iReady, DRA, Easy CVM. There could be another one also. Those are just some of the most common ones. Star rating is another one. So if your child attends a public school and you don't have this information, just ask your teacher. Your teacher should be able to print out a report that gives you this information. I do caution you that MAP does not use a regular grade level system. It uses Lexile levels, but you can Google Lexile levels to reading levels, and it will give you a reading level and something that's understand, which is something like a number in a letter. So for example, like 3.5. That would be 3rd grade, 5th month of 3rd grade, about midway through. That's an example. So once you know this information, And if you don't have this information, maybe you homeschool or you go to a small private school where they don't do this, contact me and I can do the test for a nominal fee and help you, give you some ideas as well. So once you know that student's book level, you can find books around that level. And I'm going to put a link in the description box where you can find books around the student's level and interests, which is my second thing to, my second tip to engage readers. Focus on interests. So everyone has interest. A lot of times I hear people, even teachers, say, well, that kid has no interest. That kid just likes to sleep. Well, that kid's interested in sleep. Maybe you can find a book about sleeping. Everyone has interests. Sometimes it's hard to find the interests. So, and they might not be interests that a lot of people think are appropriate or suitable to read about. For example, a lot of adolescent boys and middle school boys like bathroom humor and really silly books. A lot of people say, oh, they shouldn't read that. Yes, they should. If they're interested in that, they should read it. And then they can move on to something else later. You know, a lot of girls like pop culture, singers, actresses, and some people might say, well, that's just not good literature. But if it gets the kid to read it. Because anything will help. And if it's based on an interest that the child already knows something about, the student already knows, the student is able to better access that information. More than if it's something that they do not know about. Background knowledge really helps. And my next tip is to include text features. Now, text features are things in reading that help the reader better understand text. And so if books have text features, many times the student can read higher than the student could otherwise read. So what do I mean by that? So for example, many students, especially if they have reading comprehension problems or if they are English learners, really benefit by having books with illustrations. They can look at the illustrations to help them find meaning. Again, some people say, well, that child's in 6th grade, they shouldn't be using illustrations. Or there's this idea now that, that's cheating. No, it's not. The child may need to use the illustrations to understand the meaning, not to decode the words, that's a different thing, but to understand the meaning and to learn vocabulary. And again, that doesn't have to be a permanent thing. It may be that, this child just needs books with illustrations for just a few weeks. I've been working with a really awesome student who needed picture books at first, and now we're into early chapter books without the pictures because she just needed time to get used to reading. So that's one thing that you can use to help students. Headings and subheadings can help, especially nonfiction books. Things like maps and charts where the student can visually see things. Glossaries. And if you're working with an English language learner, someone who's learning English or learning a second language or sometimes additional language, dual language and bilingual text can also be really helpful. Again, especially at first. And then later, if the student has a good knowledge, better knowledge of English and has some confidence, that can be taken away. Or maybe you wouldn't have to use that as much. Your child will have more options in reading. I'm going to also give a list of no-nos, common things that are recommended to struggling students to engage them. And many times people mean well when they suggest these things, but they're not always the best things. And some of these are really trendy. So one thing that's often recommended, I see a lot, is that a child is read to, or the child listens to a tape, or now that we're in the internet age, a child streams online the book while reading. And that is not the best practice. And the reason why is because many times the child just won't read. And so it becomes more about listening than reading, and you don't really develop those skills. The one case where it is helpful to read along and listen is if the child has a significant decoding problem, if the child can't sound out words. In that case, it may be helpful, again, for a short time to listen and read. Generally speaking, the student needs to read on their own. And that's why it's so important to use that reading level to guide you. Other people try to give supports that are school-like. So they might say, you're going to have to write a report about this, or I need to know that you read, so you're going to have to write a paragraph about what you read, or you have to do a worksheet, or you have to do a graphic organizer. Those things have a place in the classroom, and they can be helpful for academic learning, for classroom reading, but we're trying to get the kids to enjoy things now, and they're not going to enjoy reading if you give them a worksheet every time. In fact, most of the time the student won't do that. They'll say, well, I just won't read. Because again, they have a negative relationship with school often and with reading and writing. The next one might be a little bit confusing because I did say that reading levels are important, but it's important not to over-rely on that. What I mean by that is if it's something that a student is interested in and it's a little bit above the reading level, let's say a student has a 2.5 reading level and it's maybe a 3.5 book, let's try it. If a student wants to read that book, that student should. And if it has something like pictures or it has some of those text features to help, then the student might be able to read it. Likewise, if you have a student who just has no confidence at all, and that student needs to start at a very low reading level, lower than the actual reading level, that's okay too. Again, that should just be a short thing, but it might take a while for the student to work its way up to what the student can actually perform, because again, we have such negative views about reading in this culture, and a lot of students have just really negative views about reading, which is unfortunate and not good for their achievements. Over-reliance on leveled text or curriculum-based readings. I don't know how many times I've heard a student say, I'm a J or I'm a K, and that's because they use the leveled readers, Nails, which I know are controversial. The system actually can really help when it comes to guided reading, which is reading that's done in a classroom setting, usually in small groups, where students work their way up. They increase their level that way. But when it comes to reading just for fun and students reading on their own and encouraging reading, they don't want to read a leveled reader. They want to read something that is interesting to them and that they can choose. And most of the time, those leveled readers, there often is a choice, or the choice is very limited. This is a big one, and I might ruffle some feathers here, especially in the special education world and even the ESL world. But it is a very bad practice to excuse students from reading or to not encourage students to read because the student may be embarrassed or the student may lose confidence. I hear a lot, especially in some of my past schools, teachers were concerned, well, we can't give that student an easy book because then the student will feel stupid. Or even if that student knows their reading level, that's going to really demotivate them and they're going to feel really bad, and we can't do that. And in front of their peers, if the peers see them reading an easy book, that's not going to be good. It is very demotivating and very hard on confidence and self-esteem to not be able to read. And ultimately, that's what you're looking at if a child does not intervene, if a child does not read, and the child does not grow their reading level. Now, that doesn't mean that you should, say to the whole world, oh, this child, reads at a lower grade level and this child needs all these supports. No, don't do that. Don't be rude about it. But there are ways to discreetly help a child to find books that are good for that child. That may include going over test scores privately. That's something that a lot of people don't think about. And sometimes it's logistically hard if you've got a big class to go over test scores privately, but something like that helps. Choosing texts that have covers that are age appropriate. That can give some confidence to students. No older student wants to read a book that's got a baby cover on it. And also, if you do something with the reading after, for example, if you have a group discussion or you have reading groups, you need to plan those really carefully because students need to be comfortable. So again, some people may say I'm a meanie for including that one, but it's really true. We're in an age where socio-emotional skills have largely overshadowed academic concerns at school. There's so much concern about socio-emotional development of children that I feel like we've lost academics some. And I'm going to say that too. I know a lot of people disagree with that, but it's true. We're in school to learn, and there needs to be some academics. And again, if a child doesn't know how to read, that child will not have confidence in reading. It's how it is. And that child is also at high risk of having some really bad life outcomes that are not very motivating either, such as a higher rate of going to prison. Most prisoners can't read. A much higher rate of living in poverty. That's not a fun way to live. That's not something that's good for socio-emotional health, to be living in poverty. I mean, limited job opportunities. There's lots of really, really bad consequences for not being able to read still. And there will be in the future as well, because reading is tied into critical thinking and vocabulary. There's no way to get around it. We can try or we won't. We're not going to get around it. You need to read for critical thinking, for empowerment in life. It's an important skill. So I'm going to end with a story. This is a story of Jorge, and he had a teacher named Cher. Now, Jorge was an English language learner from Guatemala, very unmotivated. He was 15. His parents were agricultural workers. He had been in the U.S. for 3 years, but had very little success, and he lived in a rural area where there were a few English learners. So understandably felt very misunderstood, felt like he just didn't have much of a chance, and he wanted to leave school and work. He really didn't care a whole lot about learning because he didn't see that he had much of a future in this country. So his teacher Sharon didn't know how to engage him. She saw that he needed to read and that he needed to increase his reading skills so he could at least have basic skills when he graduated, and that's practical. Even if a student doesn't read by high school, they can still gain enough reading skills to have some basic skills, and sometimes even more. I've seen students become really good readers in high school, but Sharon didn't want for him to graduate without having at least basic reading skills. So one day she noticed that Jorge had a notebook and he would draw, and when he drew comic book characters, and they were American comic book characters, which actually isn't that unusual because comic book characters are common all over the world. American culture is popular all over the place. And so what she did was she was able to find a whole bunch of easy to read comic books in the school library. And she gave him a basket of books and said, "Here, you choose one." And suddenly he read a Batman book. He did not want to put it down. He was so engaged with this Batman book. And so he read the whole series, and he greatly improved his readings and English skills. So that's the story of Jorge, and it's not an unusual story. No, it was not. The interest was not something that most people would even think of, but it was a huge interest for him, and there was a solution. So there's always hope. It may take some trial and error to find what your child likes and what the child is confident in. It may not occur right away. It may take going through many, many books. It may take, many different types of books. It may take lots of different things, but there's always hope. And struggling reader reading is not just a trivial thing. It's not just something that's nice. It can be something that can transform that student's academic trajectory. And so you may be hearing this and you may be really confused about some of the things I said. You kind of understand what a reading level is, you kind of don't. And I can understand that because I went through this very quickly, and it's a very complicated thing. You may not know where to find books still. Again, this was just a brief overview, and you may not understand how that works. So I'm going to soon have a course on fluency for families. Fluency means developing the skills to read accurately and with ease. So in other words, reading comfortably is one way to say it. And the course isn't ready yet. I'm working on it. It'll probably be ready in the next month or two. But for now, if you're interested in learning more about these skills, some of the things that are included in the course are decoding test data. I have a whole module about test data and how to understand that, finding levels, finding appropriate books for students, and more like that. I'm going to put my email list, my link to my email in the description box. And if you subscribe to my email list, you'll also receive a free book, it's an ebook. My Child Struggles to Read, Now What? And this is a book for families who have struggling readers. So if you have a struggling reader, this can be one step to help you. So if you're interested in that, please click on the link in the description box. And until next time, keep learning.